When we have players or teams coming to ITRC, they have different things they always want to leave with, but the main thing is they just want to know how can they get better.
Right. The main thing is how can I be more consistent, how can I hit my target more often, and how do I strike more?
Yeah, they want to definitely strike more, and they want to know how can I adjust to the lane conditions, or I end up getting over and under on my ball reaction. How do I read lanes? A lot of it is what's going on the 60 feet past the foul line.
Right. I hear all of those things, but in my mind I'm thinking I just need to get some video, we'll do some shot repeatability, and we'll figure out odds are it's something that's happening right at the start of their approach that's making all of these things inconsistent.
So when we come in here and you come for a lesson or for a group, we actually do a shot repeatability analysis. So we measure at least 10 shots on 2 different patterns, and we kind of look at those shots to give us an idea where do we want to attack the physical game, because bottom line, the player's responsible for what's going on down the lane. You know, the lane is really not doing it. It's usually the player that's doing it.
Right, and oftentimes they're really very focused at what's going on right at the point of release, and I always say that, that's where we try and fix things and we try and force a change there. Usually doesn't hold. It's usually something that we've got to attack at the very beginning of the approach, and that's just the effect of what's caused the problem.
So we have 3 types of swings you usually see going down the lane, or launch angles going down. You'll see those players that are really accurate where they slide and lay down the ball. They're sliding within a board every time, sending that ball down the board every time. But the shot just get wider as it goes down the lane. Another type we have, they don't slide in the same place. They're 3 or 4 boards difference every shot, but they're very accurate at the arrow. So they really are, it's very narrow at the arrow, so it kind of crisscrosses and gets wide farther down. And the third one we see, they're not sliding in the same place either, but they're kind of like vision. They look at the shapes of the ball or something like that. So it doesn't really crisscross, it just kind of stays parallel going down the lane. And each one of those take a different degree or a different focus on how we can help them get better.
Right. It could be footwork in one case, or in another case it may be simply, a lot of them are really arm swing related, but there's different facets of the approach that we want to center on to correct those problems.
And you hit on the arm swing is so important because you're the launching device of that bowling ball. But what part of the arm swing is causing the issue? It could be right at the finish, it could be at the top of the backswing, how you're taking it back, it could be the start, it could actually be the footwork. So we actually want to trace it back. We want to what's finding it going down at the pins, the inaccuracy going down the pins, to the break point, to the arrows, to our release right off our line, and trace it all the way back to try to tighten everything up.
So that's why we do the video, we do the shot repeatability, tells us where we want to get started.
So let's take a look at some different examples, and we'll kind of walk you through our program of taking it from the end down at the pins, bringing it all the way back to the foul line to the very start, of different techniques that will help you improve your game. Players are always looking for ways to improve, and they want to be more consistent of their launch angles, the break point, and they want to strike more, and they're looking for ways to do that.
Right, and really where it starts to kind of show itself is at the finish. We want to make sure that we have a balanced posted finish.
So we trace it back, and like we demonstrated with the 3 different launch angles and the catch patterns that people have, there's traits or tendencies in different people's games, and there's like 3 different ones. But one of the keys they want to really pay attention to is where do they slide.
Right, and we can slide on different, the position of your foot is important. Sometimes we want to know if you're sliding in the same place. It doesn't matter if where you start isn't exactly where you finish. We would call that lateral movement. But if you're sliding in one spot, one shot, and then 2 or 3 boards in one direction, the other, and all of that is really going to affect your ability to repeat shots, and your launch angle and your accuracy will really suffer.
So a board or 2 is going to be okay. So if I'm sliding 19, 20, 19, 20, 21, in that range, generally that's going to be good. But you're saying if I slide like 19, 19, 23, 19, 19, 18, 17, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, obviously that's going to affect where the ball gets to down lane and at the same time where you are through the arrows. And I can remember growing up, it was really important, all of my coaches really harping on the fact that I needed to slide in the exact same place that I started with, and it's just not a reality today. Players really are kind of getting their body out of the way of the swing so their swing can stay straight. Oftentimes as a right-hander they're going to slide a little further left than where they started, and as a left-hander they'll slide a little further right.
And it could change depending on their launch angle. The more direct you're playing up the lane, you might not slide as far left from your starting position, but the more you're trying to open up the lane or players trying to hook the lane, they might slide in 10 boards left of where they started.
Right, that drift pattern really, like you're saying, can change. I know when I'm playing in, like you're saying, I'm a little bit more consistent with starting and sliding in the same place. When I play further right, and we see this often with a lot of players, they're going to drift a little bit more left, just trying to get a little bit more comfortable with, kind of the visual path of the ball.
So there's some systems out there, they talk about this magic number or different that, it always should be the same, and it's not going to be the same depending on what part of the lane they're going to be playing.
Right.
Every bowler is going to be a little different as well. One thing you want to pay attention to when you're looking where you slide, if you're so focused on that target and you're sliding in a board or two different and you're readjusting your swing to hit that target, what's that going to do down the lane to them?
It's definitely going to affect you're going to see a wide range of, accuracy down lane.
Yeah, so it's going to be really accurate. You're splitting boards almost at the arrows, but because the ball came from a different place, because you slid in a different spot, that could be 5, 7, 9 boards down at the pins. And we'll hear players sometimes say, wow, these lanes, I missed my mark by half a board and I went Brooklyn. Well, that's really what's going on.
Exactly. When we didn't have balls that hooked a lot, it was really important that we got the ball going the right direction off our hand. And so we were very, very focused at the target area, at the arrows, at the at the dots, if that's what you looked at. But today's player really sees it more in shapes. They see where they need to get the ball at the arrows and where they need to get to at the break point.
So now we've taken a look at our sliding foot. What about the trailing leg? What are the things that we want to look at for that trailing leg or the balance leg when you're making the shot?
Right. I really like to see the trail foot, the toe leading. A lot of times we'll see folks get into their slide and their heels leading. And I really feels like that gets their lower body a little bit too open to the launch angle that they're trying to create. So
when you say leading, though, at first the heel will turn in just slightly, so they create room for that downswing for the ball to get into the slot, as we call it. But then as soon as it starts kicking over to the side, you want to see it roll over towards the toe, towards the wall, or towards their left side.
Right. I think that really gets their hips in better line with what they're trying to do, and I think it also gives you a little bit better place to throw from in terms of leverage.
So it actually helps your legs and help you accelerate your shot, so to speak. You actually are using your hips, you're using your legs. If you leave that heel all the way, it actually makes your hips kind of bail out, and then it ends up being all upper body.
Exactly.
What about the opposite arm? The opposite arm of the finish position. What kind of thing are we looking for there?
Right, a really sensitive part of the game in my mind. I think if we keep it in front a little bit too long, it tends to get our upper body a little bit too open. If we close it down too quickly, then our shoulders want to swing a little bit too much. There's a little bit too much motion. Our throwing shoulders tends to lead, and then our mistakes tend to be a little left as right-hander off our hand.
So is there a spot that we would like the shoulders to be square? What part of the swing or that finish position would we want that to be square?
I like for your core to be square to your break point, what you're trying to hit. We don't want to be too square to the lane if we're trying to open up the lane, and vice versa, we don't want to be too open if we're trying to play straight up the lanes.
And one thing, the trick that a lot of the high-end players will do, and you league bowlers can try it as well, is that if you have a tendency for that non-bowling or that balance arm to go back too quick, is we want to see you just kind of roll your thumb down and just continue rolling it down in a clockwise motion. That's going to inhibit the shoulder, lock the shoulder, so the arm still can go back, but it keeps the shoulder forward. And it's not so much the problem that the balance arm goes back, it's when that shoulder goes back too early before the release.
Right, and a lot of times that happens, it feels like we try to correct it as it's happening, but usually it's just a byproduct of sometimes that swing just not getting started at the right time, and you need to do that in order to get the ball off your hand and to get back in time. So we start using our upper body and our shoulders to close things down to get everything facing the right direction again.
That's a strong key. A lot of times using the upper body to redirect the swing because it's coming from a bad position, or we're trying to hit a target, or we're sliding in a different place. Anytime we start getting that upper body going in that finish position, redirecting the bowling ball and getting those shoulders rotate, nothing good comes from that. Another thing that we want to look at is the sliding knee, over the sliding foot. Do we want it behind the toe, in front of the toe, equal with the toe? What do we like to see there at the finish position?
I think we'd like to see the knee sort of break that plane so it gets in front of your toe right at the point of release. A lot of times we'll see folks a little bit too far back on their heels, or they may, posture is really important at this point, and that's kind of a good indication, something we look for that tells us if their body's in the right position.
And that finish position, well, that's the time when that release happens. It's, when you're getting to that finish and that posting, that's when that release happens. And where do we want that release to actually start? Do we want it to start in front of the slide foot, behind the slide foot? Where do we want it to start?
And it's almost a really sort of gradual progression of the release. It starts when your thumb exits. We like to see it right around your ankle, or maybe even a little bit before that. And then, by the time your fingers are out of the ball, that could be actually out in front of your toe. So it's, I think we always feel like there's a moment in time where we're doing something to create good roll and rev rate and all of that, and it's all timing, and it has very much to do with just a process that's happening. Your thumb exiting easily, and then your fingers just sort of rolling out of the ball.
So you're not really thinking of releasing the ball at that point. It's just rolling off your hand.
Right. It's just an end result of everything else happening properly.
And you'll see a lot of the higher end players right at that spot. If we drew a line vertical from their ankle up, that ball and hand will break that plane before their shoulders because they're letting the ball lead into the release. And then where a lot of league bowlers or amateurs, I think they get in trouble because they use too much upper body and they get that shoulder leading into the release.
They feel like they have to hook the ball, that they're, there was a time, I think, and kind of the difference between, I think, today's game and even when I was playing a little bit more seriously out on tour, where the way we hooked the ball was we were contracting and we were using lots of upper body and lots of wrist and hand, and today's bowling balls and environment, today's game just doesn't call for that. Hand's going to be much, much softer out of the ball, and they just roll after it. And it's amazing the amount of good, heavy roll that they get. We're always trying to do something to pull back on it, and it's not necessary today.
So that was when we used to have the generation that we would try to lift the ball, and actually our follow through would go to the ceiling, and we really almost would short arm the release, and we're trying to make it quicker. And today's game, they actually get long and extend the follow through down the lane, and it's more going down towards the pins than through the ceiling, but it is an extension towards their break point. What about balance? Balance at that finish position. What is that a key? I mean, we always say post a shot. What do we mean by that?
Well, I think, it's natural to kind of throw the ball and then want to see what the ball's going to do, and you start reacting very, very quickly. And, you look at our better players, and we look at our Team USA players and the PBA players and PWBA players that come through this building and that we get to watch on TV every weekend, and you can tell they throw the ball and they are just dead posted. There's not a lot of movement. Their foot's still, and they're patiently watching their ball reaction, where, those of us that aren't bowling
quite
at that
often.
level, or
Yes.
quite often, either our timing doesn't allow that, or we're just not as disciplined as we need to be.
And that's just something you can really work on just on your shot. Just make yourself stay there as long as possible, and it will help develop your lower body and your core, kind of fix it. But when you're out of balance, it comes from almost that pivot step prior to it, that something is driving and changing. And once that ball's gone, it makes you fall off if you're a right-hand bowler to the right, or if you're a left-hand bowler, fall off to the left. Kim, as we come back from the finish position and we were looking at the different launch angles and breakpoint control different bowlers have and liabilities that might be traced to the finish position, but those are all created before the finish position. So let's continue back to the pivot step or the power step, which just happens just prior to the finish position. What are things as a coach you look for?
Well, I really look for where the ball is at the top of the swing in relation to their head. If we feel like it's gotten outside their head, then we'll really start seeing, I think, breakpoint control issues. And if it's same thing, vice versa, if it got inside too much, then they're really going to try and realign it, so we start ending up with a lot more muscle in their swing, and it's really difficult to repeat that movement once we've created muscle.
So either videotaping from the front or from the back, we're looking for alignment at the top of the swing, at the peak of the backswing, that the ball is in kind of line with the head to their launch angle, so it could just drop into right into their sliding foot and they don't have to redirect it.
Exactly.
They get into trouble when they try to redirect it because it's coming from a bad position.
Right, and at that point, they're sort of stuck with that. There's no fixing it at that point. It has everything to do with how they got the ball into motion and the direction of the push away. So again, we start trying to fix things there where we really can't. And the way that we fix it is through muscle, hard to repeat. One of the other things that I really look for is just how, I think, distinct that pivot step is. Sometimes we'll see players just sort of float through it and they really can't, I think, get explosive and use their legs enough. We really want to see almost an acceleration, not a deceleration into the slide.
So they want to be driving from that point. That's what we want to see. And this is when their lower body really gets engaged. Prior to that, and we'll cover that in a little bit steps before, but we're getting the ball into the swing. And at the top of the swing, now everything's done. Everything's loaded up. We want to just let unload. And this is where we want to drive with our lower body and just let the swing drop. Problem is, a lot of players, they decide they need to drive with the swing.
Right, and they just, they forget that we want to use our legs here, and because we have this ball in our hand, we want to feel like we're throwing it, and everything just kind of happens from the waist up, and we just don't remember that our legs can play a huge part in creating power and ball speed.
So we also look about in that pivot step, as the ball is going in the backswing, is it still going up? Is it pausing at the top? Is it coming down? This is sometimes referred to timing when you're going to be created at the finish, but what would you like to see as a coach?
I like for it to, almost hang there, and then that's kind of where you hear a lot of people talk about a flat spot, and that's where they have this long period of time in my mind where they can do different things with their hand, where they can make axis rotation changes, and when the ball's still rising at that point, it gets very, very steep. So in relation to timing, if they let go of it a little bit early, they're going to miss right. If they hang on to it just a split second longer, their mistake can be left, and so it's so sensitive at that area.
And it's just because they're redirecting the swing on the downswing, so they're kind of, you're talking about a bowler that actually has it behind their head, and as it's kind of looping or wrapping around their body in that release point, they have a small window, and if you're pulling down from the shoulder and you're getting steep, it's really hard to have that great flat spot everyone talks about. How you get that flat spot is you have patience to let it sit at the top and let the ball create the downswing, not the shoulder. The minute that shoulder starts doing it, you have no chance. You actually will get your hand on top of the bowling ball. And bowlers will put wrist supports trying to fix that. Can a wrist support fix that at that point?
It really can't. We always hear the term, you want to wait on it, and I think it's a difficult term to kind of understand unless you really get the concept that that swing has to be coming down on its own, and you don't want to chase it down or hurry it down to get to that spot. You just have to leave it alone, and if you do, then your hand's going to find itself in the right position.
And we want to make sure that at that point we're driving, accelerating, and this how it helps create the balance, is that we want everything going towards our target, to our break point, our launch angle. We don't want to be really redirecting it at this point. We want to let it just pause. And from the side, we're kind of looking at a posture. We talk about posture, we're kind of looking at aggressive. They're going to have spine tilt forward. But from the side view, we almost can see like a T. We can see the top of the backswing and the ball, and their non-bowling arm almost in a straight line with it. So it's almost like it creates a T with their shoulders and their hips. That ball, that opposite arm doesn't have to be straight in front, but from the side it appears to be because it's level, because that creates balance.
Right, and whether it's in front, a lot of that has to do with your rev rate and your ability. A lot of times we'll see players, because I think there was a time where everyone really was trying to focus on getting that left arm in front as far right as they could and for as long as they could, and unless you have the rev rate and the ball roll to match that, we end up having to really shut that down really quickly. And so, that's a really kind of a personal position for each player, where that left arm needs to be and how quickly it needs to get to the side.
But we really like to see it balanced with the height of the backswing. The higher backswing, we'd like to see it a little bit lower. Lower backswings could be more level, but when we see liability is that non-bowling arm starts going up in the air and goes high, and all of a sudden now that takes your center of gravity up. It actually makes you use all upper body going into the finish, and it's really hard to use your legs and or have any kind of balance with the finish position.
So kind of the best position in my mind is for that left arm to be no higher than your shoulder height.
And we like to see it quiet. We don't want to see it bouncing around all over the place. When we mean quiet, it's just nice and relaxed and subtle. And this works whether you're right-handed or left-handed. All this doesn't matter whether you're left-handed or right-handed. These same principles applies to all of you. So we're tracing it back. Again, bowlers looking at that break point, that consistency, and this game is definitely a cause and effect. And you just want to kind of keep going back to find out where that liability is. And when we're doing the training here and the taping and we're doing video analysis, one thing can affect another. And we don't want to change things that aren't going to make them a little bit better. We want to find the cause. So now we've gone through the finish position, and there might be a balance issue or anything. And we come back to the pivot step. And that pivot step is created by the step before it, which is going to be when we had the start. What do we look for in the start?
Yeah, the start is crucial to, I think, making a good shot. And I always talk about when people come to our training center and all the students that I work with that, what's cool about our game is we can play it a lot of different ways. But I think there's probably 2-3 things that are really important, regardless of your style, that have to happen in order to repeat. And one of which is your position of your body in the stance. We want to make sure that I like to say your core is facing what you're trying to do, facing the launch angle that you're trying to create.
So the core doesn't necessarily have to be straight up the lane. You kind of want to be walking or taking your steps to that start up the lane, but you want your core and everything oriented to your launch angle. When you get to the foul line, the direction it's going. We really don't want to see a lot of rotation of the body during the approach.
Right, we see that often, a lot of twisting where their upper body may be open, and I'll see their hips square and their feet open. All three of those pieces of your body, so your hips, your shoulders, and your ankles, we want them all facing the same direction. And we want them to face what you're trying to do, the launch angle that you're trying to create.
So we almost look at it like the start that we're initiating. We're getting the ball into the swing, to the top of the swing, and from that point, when we talked about the pivot step or the power step, that's where we just want it to drop in and go. So we're winding up the bowler, so to speak, so they can unwind and load to the launch angle. So this is critical for consistency, and a lot of times when we see arm swing issues with a player or balance issue at the finish position, it can be traced back to this step.
Exactly, so often. And I think the next thing that I really look for is that push away. And I think it's important to be aware of your push direction, the shape of that push away, and also the speed of that push away. All three of those things can really impact your release at the finish.
So it's going to be the tempo of it, and when you say the shape, we like to see it rounded. I mean, a lot of times, anytime you get that ball in front of your hand or you get a sharp edge, you're going to have to grab it and then pull. And when that happens, all of a sudden the shoulder is going to follow either. So we talked about that pivot step, that when you didn't want that shoulder leading, it could be created right there at the start because you kind of let the shoulder either follow the push or you let your hand, the ball get in front of your hand a little bit, it locked that shoulder. And once that shoulder is locked, it can't relax as it goes forward.
Right, and that push direction, I think for a long time as a player and even as a coach before I was a little better educated, we used to tell players to push towards their break point. Again, it just creates too much movement with that swing. We want the swing to be as straight as possible. So, we preset the angles in the stance, but that push direction is still going to go directly straight up the lane.
Because the lane is so long, and it doesn't look that way, but the lane is extremely long versus how wide it is. And we want to keep that arm swing as tight. And we're only dealing with 1 degree, 2 degree launch angles. So we want that core opening up or our body posture oriented towards our break point. Well, we want to keep that swing going as straight because we're talking very small degrees of changing the launch angles of whether you're going up the lane or whether you're trying to hook the lane. So we want to keep it as direct as possible. How can we have that swing help it get going straight back? What do we want to do with our footwork?
Well, in order for that to happen, because we like to see it start between our chin and our shoulder, because that's just a good position, a good slot or window that we like to see the ball in. So we get our body to escape out of the way so that swing can stay on that plane. So the best way to do that, as a 5-step delivery, it's going to be your second step. If you're a 4-step delivery, it's going to be your first step. We want that leg to slide out of the way so the swing can drop right underneath that shoulder and stay in that window.
So we don't mean that you need to be walking a tightrope all the way up the approach. We just want to see that step being aligned with the non-bowling side. So we create a window or an opening for that ball swing to stay with us tight underneath our shoulder.
Right, it's a common kind of error, I think, when folks do work on their crossover, that they feel like they have to kind of tightrope it up there like you're saying. And one of the other things that I think is really important is the position of that foot as you get into that crossover. As we preset those angles, and let's just say you've got the lane pretty opened up and your right side of your body as a right-hander, your left side of your body as a left-hander is swung open. If we get into that step and our foot is what I like to say is kind of closed, then all of a sudden we've shut that angle down with our hips and then we have to swing it back open. So we really recommend that you kind of lead with your heel at that point, and that's what helps kind of maintain the consistency of those angles.
We use terms like we use the crossover term. We don't really mean we want you to cross over that step, and that's what it's always called. We just want you to be in front of it or in line. So like you're walking on a 2x4 or walking on a curb. We don't really want you to cross over, and it's just like push away. That term push away has always been bad. We just want you to initiate the swing, get some momentum and initiate that ball swing, and keep that hand relaxed. Let the ball momentum take the arm back. Another term that we use is arm swing. Really, ball swing is going to be more urgent. So we want all this stuff to initiate nice and loose and try to keep everything aligned.
Right. In this case, more is not better. Overshooting that crossover is just as harmful as not getting there at all. And really trying to make sure that swing stays as loose as possible. And the less we manage it or bring it anywhere, the better off we are. Stance is critical in creating repeatability in bowling. And one of the really important things that we talk about is making sure that our shoulders, hips, and feet all match the launch angle that we're trying to create. You want to liken it to other sports. If we're throwing a ball, which is what we're doing in bowling, we want to make sure that our throwing shoulder never starts leading out. So if we think about it, if we're trying to throw a football or a baseball, we don't want this in front because that really affects our ability to have good leverage and good repeatability and any power. So with Nick, we want to make sure that his shoulder is slightly a little bit lower than his left shoulder. We want it a little bit behind, and his hips and his foot all matching, all three angles matching each other. We talk a lot about having the ball positioned between his chin and his shoulder. We want it to start there because that's where we want it to finish. So it makes sense in today's game to have our swing as straight as possible. So we start it between his chin and his shoulder. Maybe you want to think just right of your belly button if you're right-handed, or just left of that if you're left-handed. Starting it there. So Nick takes a 5-step delivery. With his first step, he's going to go forward, and his second step is going to be what we call a crossover step. And we have 2 guides on the approach to help make sure that happens. What it allows is the swing to happen in this really good window between his chin and his shoulder. So as he takes that step, he's going to go 1 with his first step, and then cross over directly in front of the second step. That's going to allow a great pathway to drop, and he doesn't have to swing the ball around his body, but he's getting his body to escape out of the way so the swing can stay straight. One of the things, really important things that I look for when I'm giving a lesson is push away shape, direction, and speed of that push away, I think, are so critical in repeatability. We want that push direction to go straight up the lane. We want to make sure that the shape of it is nice and rounded. We don't want any hard edges with our push away, similar to what we used to do in the 80s and 90s. We really saw the ball really lock out in front of us. Nowadays, we really see the ball get into the swing much easier and much earlier. So we'll see Nick just do a nice small rounded motion with his push away. That's really important. The next thing that we look for is at the end of that push, we want to make sure that the ball doesn't get in front of his hand. That's really going to affect your ability to have good ball roll and really good rev rate. We want to make sure that, not necessarily cupped, but that your fingers stay in front. We don't want this. We want to make sure that hand stays nice and relaxed, but at the same time, the wrist stays straight. One of the common things that we see here is folks that really overshoot that push away, and when they overshoot it, this shoulder really wants to lead, and then we get in just a difficult position to try, and we have to make sure that we move that shoulder back, and then there just begins to be too much movement with your shoulder. We want this to be stable and still. You can see it one more time. As he over pushes, his shoulder leads. Really common mistake in today's game. So a lot of times we can trace problems with controlling our break point and our launch angle to the push direction. When we see that they're spraying the ball down lane, a lot of the time it has a lot to do with push direction. If they happen to push too far right, the ball is going to get oftentimes too far inside their body or inside their back, not in line with their head where we want it to be. Or if they push in, they'll see their mistakes happening down lane, oftentimes are going to be left.
We're tracing the whole approach for the consistency all the way back, the cause and effect, and now we're all the way to the start. And a lot of coaches try to fix everything right initially with the start, and a lot of times players can do things that are not what you say textbook and get away with it, but what are some liabilities possibly we could be seeing there in the start?
I think a lot of the things that I see is sometimes I'm just looking at their lines and I'll see their shoulders a little bit too closed, and or I'll see just an inconsistency from the top of their body to their ankles, and we really want there to be straight lines there.
Besides having the ball between their shin and shoulders, a lot of times generally we would like to see the ball at least level or your hand level of your elbow, if not slightly above, so that way the weight of the bowling ball, centrifugal force to initiate the swing. But not all bowlers start that way. We have bowlers that'll start with the ball lower, start the ball higher. We don't want to start changing everyone to do the same thing. It depends on what we see with what their game calls for.
Right. A lot of the times if we see a lot of muscle in the swing, one of the things that I check for is the ball's position in the stance, how far away the ball is from your body. I feel like sometimes if it gets too far away from you, you're holding it. And once you're holding it, then you can see just all of the upper body, that arm contract. And at that point, it's really difficult to kind of unlock that and keep your swing very loose. So I like to see it just a little bit closer to your body and let your body hold the weight of the ball.
Yeah, we see some bowlers a lot of times will get that ball out in front of them, and then all of a sudden that makes the upper body tight, and then they start leaning back on their heels trying to get balance, and it's not a really good starting position. The term we use a lot of times is we want to see balance at the finish. And you can't create balance during the approach if you're starting in an unbalanced position.
Right. So I like to see a lot of, the player finding their balance in the beginning before they ever get going, because I feel like your body just wants to just yearn for that throughout their approach.
Yeah, we want to see in the stance more weight on the balls of your feet, because it is an athletic sport that we're doing. We're trying to send energy down the lane. We're trying to be consistent. And I like to see it balanced on both feet. You'll hear different theories. You want 60 on your non-bowling side or 60 on your bowling side or anything. What are your opinions of that, Coach?
Yeah, I like you said, I like to see it on the balls of your feet. Sometimes people try to correct things that are happening at the finish and the start, and they will, maybe it's a player that is a little bit more forward with their posture, and I'll see them kind of start on their heels or almost further back here, thinking that that's going to save it at the end, and it really isn't. It's a sport where we want to be in an aggressive athletic position. So I like your weight a little bit more forward, a little bit more bend at the waist. I think will serve you throughout.
And you bring up bowlers that are losing their posture at the end and end up kind of collapsing a little bit, so they say, well, I'll start farther back. But that actually creates the problem a lot of times, because you're trying to get finished, but you're already started too far back, so your body's trying to realign itself during the approach, and it just can't save itself, and it ends up posture going forward. If you have a tendency that you're seeing yourself falling off or falling forward at the finish, you probably don't want to be leaning farther back in the stance. You probably want to actually get a little farther forward, so it actually contains it so it doesn't go forward. I would like a lot of times I want to see that your knees are over your toes in the stance, enough flexing of the knees so that their lower body has more of the weight. Keep that upper body as relaxed as possible, especially on the grip pressure. What do you want to see on that hand?
I was just going to say, I think another sort of common mistake is that players have all of the ball weight in their throwing hand. Another sort of, I think, no, because then we get just too much weight in that hand, and you can't keep your hand, your grip pressure soft enough in order to have a good release.
Now, bowlers that have relaxed hands can kind of get away with more weight in that hand, but the more grip pressure you have, the more liability you're going to have having all that weight. So we want to start distributing a little bit in the non-bowling hand, but we want to keep that bowling arm relaxed. And it's really hard to keep that bowling arm relaxed if you're really gripping a bowling ball, because there's really two squeeze zones that we actually see in the swing. It's initially when you're starting, the bowler will try to grab when the ball gets in front, and actually coming down from the pivot step into the finish. Those are two zones that bowlers will start grabbing the bowling ball. But we want you to keep your hand as relaxed as possible at the start and try to maintain that pressure throughout the whole swing. But if your arm's tight, your shoulder's tight, you're already locked up, nothing good happens from that point. So when we're working with players' physical game and they come in here for training, we really want to be analyzing the game from the finish back. So we run, like we talked earlier, we run through a shot repeatability analysis, because that's going to give us tendency as the player of what we want to work on to help them get better. And it's what happens on the lane tells us what we want to work on in the approach.
Right, so whether it's going to be something that we're looking for in the push-away or in their swing plane or at the release, that is going to identify itself, like you said, when we look at the shot repeatability. I look at kind of the caliber of the player too sometimes. I think the higher the level of the player is when we really do focus more at the foul line and move backward. We're not trying to sort of build the fundamentals. A lot of those things are already in place, and we're just trying to see where the liabilities and the weaknesses are.
So we want to find the one liability for the player that's going to make the biggest difference, so that what they spend the time on, they're going to see improvement. So we don't want them spending weeks or months working on one thing that's going to give them one pin. We want to find something that's going to give them 10 plus pins, more consistent at spares or their launch angle. So a lot of times that's swing orientated.
Yeah, I think, like you said, a lot of us, we get video, we have access to so much these days, and you get our cameras out and we look and we start trying to fix things that to us physically don't look right, and they're not going to be our best bang for our buck. We've got to figure out what's that one piece, and usually it'll represent itself down at the foul line, but it's typically something that's happened at the start.
So we want to kind of look at your style, analyze what your misses are down lane, paying attention to where you slide, and that gives us indication, do we want to work on the push away, the swing, the pivot step, leading with the shoulder. We're not saying bowlers should do everything that we just covered. We're just giving you kind of a checklist for you to kind of go through to say, that applies to me, maybe this will help my game. But again, start tracing it. We want you really tracing it back from the foul line back to the start.
When it comes to resistance training, in order to build muscle strength, there's two main ways to do this. One is using machine weights, the other is free weights. Machine weights are really good for beginners because there's going to be a limited range of motion, it's going to be a little bit safer, and it doesn't require a spotter. However, there are some limitations to this, which makes free weights a little bit better. Free weights are going to be a lot more functional for a sport. It requires the use of your core muscles in order to stabilize other joints in the body, and there's a lot more range of motion. It makes the exercises a lot more beneficial to you as an athlete and bowler. We are actually going to go through a couple of these exercises today with Steven here. Steven is going to be doing some lower body exercises. We're going to start out with just body weight, which is one form of free weight activity, just using gravity as the main resistance. And then we're going to move into some upper body exercises using some dumbbells and barbells. A standard lower body strengthening exercise is the squat. The squat is great because you can do it just using your body weight, but you can also add some weight in as well. The problem is a lot of people don't necessarily do a squat properly. And when you don't do a squat properly, you're not really going through the full range of motion, so you're not getting the benefit of strengthening the muscles through its full movement pattern. And also, you're not really going to be transferring the weight the way you need to, so you actually set yourself up for a more risk of injury or a higher risk of injury. So first off, Steven's going to start off standing with his feet shoulder width apart. He can have his toes pointed forward or slightly out, depending on his personal preference and comfort. He's going to try and keep his weight back on his heels, keep his chest pointed up and out, maybe stick up his chin up a little bit to help keep his back in line in a nice slightly straight or slightly arched position. From there, he's going to slightly flex his hips and his knees to come down to as far as he can and come back up. Typically, if your heels come off the ground or you start to lean forward, then it's time to come back up and then work on some flexibility issues in order to improve your squatting technique. For individuals with balance issues, a good modification to the squat is to use a stool or a chair. Steven's going to start off in a seated position and simply stand up. This is going to use the same motions as the squat, just in a reverse order. Instead of going down and back up, he's going to start down in the seated position and then come up. For beginners to this exercise, it's a little bit easier to start with your hands on your knees to give you a little bit of leverage and an ability to push up from the seated position. As you get better with this, start using the exercise without your hands to make it a little bit more difficult. Another modification of the squat for individuals with balance issues is to use a table or a high standing stool like this. Steven's just going to hold onto the stool as a base of support and then do the squat from there. While doing the squat, try and keep your back in a nice straight alignment and avoid bending over as you hold on to the stool. Some individuals have difficulty doing the squat, and mainly it's because of just getting the rhythm and the movement down of the hips and the knees. For the squat, in the initial movement going down, you have flexion in the hips and in the knees, and on the way up, you have extension in the knees and the hips. And these need to kind of work together. But like lots of things, when you learn something new, it's easier to break it down into simpler movements. And so for this, Steven's going to start off just bending over and touching the stool. This is going to work on hip flexion and also help improve his hamstring flexibility. From here, he's going to bend his knees and get down into the bottom part of the squat. From here, he's going to put his hands above his head and then stand up. And then repeat this as much as possible just to get kind of a nice fluid movement. Some individuals may still have issues doing this exercise, and this could be because of tightness in the calf muscles. So in order to take the calf muscles out of play, we're going to have Steven stand on a board. This is going to cause the ankles to be in a little bit of extension and relaxing the calf muscles. From here, he'll do the same steps, bending over and touching the stool, keeping his legs as straight as possible, then get down into the squat position, hands above his head, and then back up. And then one more time, just to get a nice fluid movement built up. As the exercise gets easier, you can increase the difficulty level by making the stool shorter, so you have to bend over more, increasing your hamstring flexibility. Right now, we're still using the bar underneath the heels to relax the calf muscles. Ultimately, we want to be able to do this exercise with your heels flat on the ground and still using the same height stool, if not even a lower height of a stool, to really increase your range of motion in your hamstrings. Eventually, this exercise will really help you get into a deeper squat position with a little bit more balance and be more comfortable while you're doing it, so you can increase your repetitions or even start adding some weight to really increase your muscular strength in your lower body. This variation of the squat involves a wall and a physio ball. also known as a physio ball wall squat. This is going to help Steven because it's going to take some pressure off of the knee and the hips by actually shifting his center of gravity back towards the wall. So he's going to start off with his feet out in front of him a little bit. This is going to be an easier position for those just getting started. And then trying to keep the ball in the middle of his back, he's going to squat down and come back up. Now the ball will roll up a little bit, so be aware of that. And just try not to let the ball jump out in front of you where you fall and hurt yourself. That would be a bad thing. As Steven gets better with this exercise, he's going to move his feet back closer to the wall, moving his center of gravity closer to where it will be during a normal squat without the aid of the ball. This variation of the squat will be good for just helping teach yourself how a squat should feel with the shifting of the weight throughout the exercise. If you have access to a squat rack and some elastic tubing, this is another great exercise to help you improve your squatting technique. By attaching the elastic tubing to the posts of the squat rack and then crossing the elastic band and then wrapping it behind the knees, we can actually help move your center of gravity in a better position to make it easier for you to do a squat. The further away Steven stands from the squat rack, the more tension is going to be applied to elastic tubing, making the squat even easier. Basically, this is going to help move the knees a little bit further in front of Steven where he would normally be, allowing him to get into a deeper position and have a better feeling of what the squat should feel like. As you progress with your squatting technique, there will come a time where you'll need to start adding weight to the exercise in order to fully maximize the potentials that you can get from doing the squat and maximize your strength. We suggest that when you start using a bar with your squats, you really should use a squatting rack. The squatting racks are designed for your safety and the safety of others, with these vertical posts that help prevent any front to back movement that may injure others or yourself. They also have horizontal bars that prevent how deep you can get into your squat. They also provide an aid in case you get into trouble. You have something that can catch the weight so it's not going all the way to the ground. These bars also have the ability to have a resting point for the bars, which is going to be standard on all squat racks. When setting it up for you, you want to make sure that this post is actually at your armpit level to allow you the ability to get underneath the bar and lift it up, and also be able to re-rack it when you're done with the squat without having to exert too much effort after the end of the exercise when you're going to be tired already. An additional safety feature that you should use when doing a squat is, or any other free weight exercise using a barbell, is to use the weight clips. They just slide onto the end of the bar and you can lock them into place to make sure the weights stay where they are. This is important in case you start to get in trouble and lose balance. You don't want the weight sliding off to the side, causing an even more imbalance and further risk of injuring to yourself. For the squat though, we're going to have Steven step underneath the bar and position the bar across the top of his shoulders. This is called a high bar position. There's also a low bar position, but it's not as comfortable for beginning squatters. He'll then just basically stand up to lift the bar off of the holders and get into position with his feet shoulder width apart, feet pointed forward or slightly out, and then from there he'll flex his hips and his knees to the lower, trying to keep his back in a nice straight alignment, and then come back up. Now, when you're doing this exercise, it's going to be good to have a spotter in case you get into trouble. When squatting with a bar, it's preferred that you have a spotter. And actually, in this case, you would want two. Your spotters are going to stand at the side and cup their hands underneath the bar and go down and up with it. In case you get in trouble, they can catch the weight and help you back up into the starting position so you can re-rack your bar. Another exercise to strengthen your lower body is to do the lunge. The lunge can be, at times, easier than a squat because it's easier to get into the full range of motion, but it can also be harder because you're having to use more core muscles and balance on one leg as opposed to two legs. For the lunge, you're going to start off in a standing position, feet fairly close together, toes pointed forward, and you're just going to step out. Step out far enough that you feel like you're having a nice stretch, and then when you lower your weight down, your knee kind of stays over your ankle or over your feet. You don't really want to go out in front of your toes too much because it's going to add a little bit of extra stress to your knee. Then you'll stand up and then step backwards. Try to make sure that when you come backwards, that you're doing it in a nice controlled and balanced manner, and finish your step where your foot started at the beginning of the exercise. For those individuals with balance issues, it might be easier to do a split squat to start out with. With this, you're going to get into the same starting position for a normal lunge and extend your foot out, and then you're just going to lower your weight and then come back up. And instead of coming back to the starting position, you're just going to continue to lower and raise your weight kind of like a squat. So you get the benefits of the lunge without all the balance of coming back and forward that could cause an increased risk of injury if you have any balance issues. For additional balance support during the split squat, you can use a stool or a table to hold on to as a base of support while doing the exercise. Steven is going to get into the same position and lower himself up and back up while holding on to the stool for the extra balance support. The lunge is a great activity because you can add other movements into it to make it more challenging and increase the number of muscles that are used to it, so you get a more beneficial workout. Steven's going to do a lunge and then rotate his core or his torso from side to side and then come back up. This is going to help work with the rotator muscles of the spine and the abdomen. The lunge can also be made more challenging by adding a weight. In this case, we're using a medicine ball to a normal lunge. And then by incorporating the movements of the rotation, we're actually increasing the difficulty of the lunge one more step higher. Another variation of the lunge is to incorporate a side bend at the bottom portion of the lunge. So Steven is going to bend down, put one hand above his head, and then lean towards the side that has the knee extended out in front. This is going to incorporate additional abdominal muscles into the exercise. The addition of a medicine ball to the lunge with the side bend can make it more challenging because you have the extra weight above your head that you're going to have to use your abdominal muscles to help support. As you progress through your lunge training and develop more lower body strength, you can start using dumbbells with your lunges to add increased weight. You want to start with a weight that's easy for you to manage, something that's easy for you to hold on to and won't cause any balance issues. So starting with a lighter weight is okay, and then move into something a little bit heavier. You're going to use the same lunging technique, just holding the weight to your side. An additional variation of the lunge is to use a barbell instead of the dumbbells for adding increased weight. For this, we're using the squat rack, but we've positioned the holders on the outside of the rack because of the range of motion of the lunge. We don't want to be restricted by the vertical posts. So we have the rack set the same height as the squat. So these holders are going to be right about armpit level. Steven's going to get in the same position, the bar across his shoulders. He's going to stand up, lift the bar in front of him, or lift the bar up. Then he's going to get into his lunge position and then lunge out, go lower his body weight down, come back up, and then once he's done with his repetitions, he's going to re-rack the bar. Lunges can also be done in reverse. Steven's just going to stand in the same position, but instead of stepping forward, he's going to step backwards. Then he'll lower his weight down to the ground, trying to keep his knee over his ankle, mid-foot area, and then bring his weight back up. Then he'll step forward instead of backwards to return to the starting position. The backwards lunge is going to affect the muscles in a little bit different manner than the forward lunge. You're going to get more flexibility benefits in the hip flexor area, and it's just going to train the quadricep muscles and the glutes in a little bit different manner than a forward lunge will, so you get a better overall balance of your lower body strength. Your bowling game, squatting technique, and lunging technique can all benefit from better hamstring flexibility. Now we can increase our hamstring flexibility by bending over and touching our toes while keeping our legs straight. We can also do it by leg swings, but we can also do it through this exercise here. In this instance, we are using a plyometric box with a weight on it to help keep it stabilized. At home, this can be a lot easier to do by just doing this exercise in a door frame. Stephen here is in a position where he's going to get his hips as close to the box as possible, particularly in his left hip. He's going to extend his left leg out, trying to keep his knee as straight as possible. He's then going to lift his right leg up above, trying to keep it as straight as possible. He's going to lower it as far as he can until a nice stretch is felt, and then bring it back up. Raising and lowering his leg about 10 to 20 times is going to give a good stretch and really start to help increase your hamstring flexibility. For those who have balance issues, hamstring flexibility can be worked on without actually having to get all the way to the ground. In this case, Steven's going to sit on a stool. He's going to be closer to the edge, and he's going to extend a leg out, point his toes towards the ceiling, and then reach out with his hand. Trying to keep his leg straight, he'll get a nice stretch in his hamstring. Free weight exercises are great for the upper body because they're going to incorporate more core muscle activation. Plus, it means that you have to use your stabilizing muscles in your shoulder in order to really do the exercise properly and to get the most benefit. One exercise that we can do right here is an upright row. Steven's just going to stand and lift the bar up to his chest and lower it back down. This is a great exercise to use with a bar weight because it's going to be able to use both hands at the same time. To make it more challenging, you can use a dumbbell, but it makes it really difficult, and it takes a lot of synchronization between both hands in order to do it properly. Rows are important exercises for bowling. They help strengthen the back muscles and the stabilizers of the shoulder. With bowling, we get a lot of injuries due to tightness and overdevelopment of the chest muscle and bicep muscle, so it's important to work the muscles of the back to help balance things out. Another exercise to work the muscles of the back is the bent over row. So Steven's going to stand in the same position as the upright row, except he's going to bend over, keep his back nice and straight and flat, and then bring the bar to his chest. He's going to lower it back down in a controlled manner and then bring it back up again. Once he's done, he'll stand up and then position the weight back into a resting position. Another variation of the row is the bent over one-armed row. For this, Steven is positioned on a bench. He has one knee on the bench. His opposite foot is on the ground to provide a base of support. He's going to bend over, place his hand on the pad. Now he wants his leg that's in contact with the ground to be on the same side as the weight. He'll pick up the weight and then bring it up towards his chest. Now with all rowing exercises, you want to focus on squeezing your shoulder blades together in order to get the biggest benefit of the row by really incorporating the muscles that stabilize the shoulder blade. And by squeezing the shoulder blades together, we get to incorporate those muscles the most. In the bent over one-armed row position, we can also work our tricep muscles. Steven's going to pick up the weight and get into the end position of the row. From here, he'll just simply extend his elbow, working his tricep muscle. The tricep muscles can also be worked using the overhead tricep extension exercise. This can be done both two-hand and one-hand. Here, Steven is demonstrating the two-hand method. So you're going to put the weight behind your head and flex your elbow as far as you can, and then lift the weight above your head by extending your elbows. By lifting it, you'll be working your tricep muscles. To make this exercise a little bit more difficult, you can do it one-handed and working one side at a time. This is going to cause a little bit more of a stability issue, so it's really going to help work the stabilizing muscles of the shoulder, giving you a little bit more benefit. Now, the reason we want to work the tricep muscles is because with bowling, we get a little overdeveloped in our bicep muscles, especially if we have a little bit of a technique issue in our physical game. So by working the tricep muscles, we can help balance out these issues and help our swings become a little bit more looser and more refined. Although some bowlers oftentimes have overdeveloped bicep muscles, not every bowler does. And so it's important to train the bicep muscles, and it's important to train them the right way. Right now we're going to be using a couple of dumbbell weights. Steven's going to have them hanging to his side. He's going to move them out in front of him. He's going to rotate his wrists out and then bring them up to his chest and lower them back down in a controlled manner. Now you can do this like Steven is demonstrating right now, both dumbbells at the same time. You can do them one at a time. And you can also have your wrists started out on this, as he had at the beginning, holding the weights to his side, and then bring them up like that, keeping the wrist in the same position the entire exercise. And he can also rotate his wrist while he brings them up. These are all going to work the muscle in a little bit different way, giving you a better benefit in overall muscular strength of the bicep. Now, when choosing a weight, you want a weight that you can raise and lower easily without having to use a whole bunch of other muscles involved. Oftentimes when you go to the gym, you'll see people lifting weights and they're having to really use their back to get the weight up. Now that's not going to be as beneficial because you're not isolating the muscle by itself and you're activating other muscles that we don't really want to do, and puts you at an increased risk of back problems. There are a variety of foam rollers that you can buy. They vary in length and density so that they can work different areas a little bit easier, and the density makes it so there's either greater or less pressure that, depending on what type of pain you can tolerate, because this can be painful when you first start out. The first exercise we're going to show here is for the IT band. The IT band runs from your hip down to your knee and can get very tight in individuals that run a lot. And we've seen that bowlers having a very tight IT band issue as well. So Steven's going to position himself with the foam roller underneath his hip, and he's going to put one foot on top of the other, and he's basically just going to allow the foam roller to work its way down to his knee. He's going to keep his weight over the foam roller so that he gets the most benefit from the stretch. Foam rolling can be very beneficial for tight hamstrings. Steven is going to position himself on top of the foam roller with the roller behind his knees, and he's just going to roll down to his hips. This is going to work the hamstrings by basically doing a very deep tissue massage. He can also isolate different muscles of the hamstrings by the way that he rotates his thighs on top of the foam roller. We can also use the foam roller to work on the calf muscles. Working in the calf muscles is important because they both the calf and the hamstring muscles overlap the knee, and they can have a significant impact on how much knee bend you get in the finish position at the foul line. This stretch is going to work on the glutes and the external rotators of the hip. A lot of times they can get tight and add extra pressure to the low back, so it's important to keep these nice and loose. Steven's going to put one foot on the opposite knee and then lean into the stretch in order to isolate the section of his hips that are actually getting foam rolled. This is going to increase the pressure, but in the long term is going to have increased benefits for his bowling game. For this stretch, Steven is going to sit on one end of the foam roller and then basically just lay back, trying to keep the foam roller in line with his spine. From here, he can lift his arms above his head and then also try and bring them back towards the floor. This is going to really give a deep stretch to the chest that a lot of times gets over tight in bowling situations. By moving his arms through a range of motion, he can isolate different areas that may feel tighter to him, so he can focus on those areas and just kind of sit there for a while to let things relax and loosen up quite a bit.